How many times have you tried to be feared only to find yourself hated? How often have you sought respect only to become a target? You want to carry power like a lion's roar and hold presence like a king's crown, but without becoming the man everyone despises behind closed doors. Why is that balance so elusive? Why does strength so often breed resentment and kindness so often invite contempt? This is the cruel law of power. Fear alone is not enough, and love is never reliable. To command respect, to lead without being torn down, requires a mastery few possess. You clicked because you are done with vague advice and empty platitudes. You want the cold, hard rule that separates the lion from the hunted, the king from the usurped. You want Machiavelli's law. He said plainly, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both, but a prince must avoid being hated." Therein lies your path, not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but calculated control, not softness that invites attack, but presence that commands without apology. If you're ready to learn how to be feared like a lion, respected like a king, but never hated, type silent power below. Your reign begins now. Power is not simple. It does not live in a single emotion or a single relationship. It thrives in the tension between fear, love, and hate, a triad of forces that govern every ruler, every man who seeks to command. You must understand this equation fully, because failing to balance these emotions is to court ruin. I wrote it plainly. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Fear commands obedience, enforces discipline, and keeps chaos at bay. Love offers loyalty, but it is fickle and unreliable. It shifts with moods, alliances, and convenience. The man who relies solely on love risks betrayal. The man who relies solely on fear risks hatred. But there is a finer art. The true prince, the true man of power, must walk a razor's edge. He must be feared enough to command, but never hated enough to be overthrown. Hate is poison, for it breeds rebellion, conspiracy, and destruction. Fear without respect becomes terror, and terror destroys both ruler and ruled. What creates this balance? Restraint, justice, the careful use of cruelty, swift, purposeful, and necessary, but never gratuitous. The prince who punishes fairly and visibly may be feared, but he is not hated. The man who allows injustice to fester, who humiliates or betrays unnecessarily, invites hatred. Your challenge is to project presence so formidable that fear is natural, but to temper it with fairness so that hatred never finds purchase. Because power without respect is fragile, and respect without power is illusion. In relationships, at work, and in life, this equation governs your fate. The lion roars and his followers tremble, not because he is cruel, but because they know what crosses the line. The king sits on his throne, not because he is loved by all, but because he is respected by most and feared by some. Your task is to master this law, to be strong enough to inspire fear, wise enough to avoid hatred, and strategic enough to earn respect. This is the foundation of survival. This is the blueprint of true masculine power. To be feared is not to be loud, violent, or unrestrained. It is to be precise, deliberate, and unreadable. A man whose presence alone shifts the balance of power. The lion does not roar constantly. It moves with measured authority. It lets its silence carry weight, and its absence create anxiety. Real fear is the product of unpredictability and consequence, not brute force or empty threats. Consider the great captains of history, Roman generals, Cesare Borgia, princes who ruled not merely by sword, but by the art of withholding approval and withholding themselves. The feared man controls access to his power as carefully as he wields it. He grants favors rarely, punishes swiftly, and makes his intentions a mystery. Others never know if their next move will please or provoke. This uncertainty breeds caution and respect. True fear arises when the cost of offense is unclear but always present. The man who over-explains, who justifies, who seeks approval, dilutes this fear. He teaches others that his limits are negotiable, that his patience is endless, that his strength can be tested without consequence, and they will test you repeatedly until you draw the line or lose your ground. The law of scarcity governs fear. What you do not offer freely, what you make difficult to obtain, becomes precious and feared. The man who is always available is never feared. The man who says yes to everything forfeits his power. But the man who vanishes without warning, who speaks only when necessary, who demands silence as easily as attention, he is a force. Learn to cultivate this edge, not by cruelty for its own sake, but by mastering the art of restraint. Let your calmness become a warning, your silence a threat, your absence a loss felt keenly. And when you do speak, speak with finality. Let your words close doors, not open them for debate. To be feared like a lion is to own your space completely, without begging, without apology, without explanation. It is to let your presence command, your absence punish, and your power remain untouchable. Respect is not given lightly, nor is it the currency of smiles or empty words. It is earned through unyielding standards, an invisible force field that protects the king's domain. A king is not simply visible, he is untouchable. His presence demands accommodation. His posture declares, I do not need you, you adjust to me. This is the essence of respect, power wrapped in dignity. The king does not chase approval, he holds his ground. His silence speaks volumes. His guarded reactions are measured and intentional. To command respect, you must learn the language of restraint. Speak only when your words carry weight. React only when your boundaries are crossed. Let your very existence be a statement of consequence. Machiavelli knew this well. Generosity and kindness must be offered from strength, not need. A king who gives because he must invites exploitation. A king who gives because he chooses reminds all of his dominion. This distinction is subtle but vital. The man who leads through presence commands a room before he utters a single syllable. His confidence is not loud, it is certain. His authority is not forced, it is inherent. Master your body language. Stand as if you belong to no one but yourself. Meet gazes without hesitation. Move with purpose as though the space you occupy were claimed long before anyone else arrived. Guard your emotions carefully. Let your face be an unreadable mask that hides both warmth and fury. In relationships, work, and life, respect often hinges on this unspoken power. The king's presence is a fortress. It invites others in on his terms or leaves them outside, wondering what they have lost. This is the blueprint of masculine power you seek, a presence so commanding that loyalty is drawn, not demanded. Remember, respect is not something you give away. It is a prize for those who meet your standards, and those standards are not negotiable. Fear is a weapon, and like all weapons, it cuts both ways. While fear can command obedience, it can just as easily breed hatred, and hatred is the poison that destroys empires and men alike. The difference between a ruler who is feared and one who is hated lies not in the power they wield, but in how they wield it. I warned, a prince must avoid being hated. Why? Because hate leads to conspiracy, rebellion, and eventual ruin. The man who rules through cruelty without justice is a man who sows the seeds of his own destruction. The subjects who suffer humiliation, exploitation, or injustice in visible ways will not forget. They may obey, but their obedience is fragile, built on fear of punishment rather than respect. What creates hate? It is not fear alone. It is fear mixed with visible injustice. It is the violation of what men hold dear, their property, their women, their honor. It is arbitrary cruelty, excessive punishment, and humiliation inflicted without purpose. A ruler who punishes swiftly and justly is feared, but not hated. A ruler who lingers in cruelty, who abuses power for personal gain, invites revolt. You must walk this line carefully. To command respect through fear, you must temper your cruelty with fairness. Punish those who break the rules, but never those who merely stand in your shadow. Do not steal what is precious to your subjects. Do not offend their dignity without cause, for when men hate, they find ways to tear down even the mightiest king. In your life, this means knowing when to apply pressure, and when to retreat, when to enforce boundaries, and when to allow space, when to be firm, and when to be merciful. Power without respect is a house built on sand. Hatred is the tide that sweeps it away. The man who understands this law moves like a shadow, unseen yet felt. His fear is a warning, not a threat. His power is a presence, not a terror. And his enemies are kept at bay not through hatred, but through a balance of fear and justice. Power is often lost in words. The man who speaks too much dilutes his authority. He invites debate, he opens cracks, and he surrenders control. True authority is the silence that commands, the presence that does not beg for understanding, the decision that is final and unquestioned. The silent man is the one who is feared and respected because he never wastes energy defending his position. Explaining yourself is a weakness disguised as civility. Every justification, every excuse, every appeal chips away at your standing. It says, I am unsure. I am vulnerable. Convince me. But power belongs to the man who does not explain, who simply acts and lets the consequences speak. Machiavelli understood this better than most. The prince who rules through silence creates a space of ambiguity that demands respect. His subjects do not know his next move, nor do they dare assume it will be kind. The silent ruler's mystery is a fortress. It forbids challenge and enforces obedience. In your life, this means learning when to speak and when to hold your tongue. Let others fill the void with speculation. Let them wonder at your intent. When you do speak, do so with purpose and finality. Leave no room for argument or negotiation. Silence is also a weapon of presence. It forces others to fill the emptiness with their own uncertainty. And uncertainty breeds caution. The more unsure they are of your limits and your decisions, the more carefully they tread. Authority without explanation is a position of strength. It demands respect, not through persuasion, but through the sheer weight of your presence and the finality of your actions. True power is knowing when to strike and when to retreat. The man who is feared understands that dominance is not a constant roar but a measured growl, a strategic withdrawal that builds anticipation and amplifies presence. To always push forward is to exhaust your force and invite rebellion. To know when to pull back is the art of control. Retreat is not defeat, it is recalibration. When you remove yourself from the battlefield, you force your rivals to face absence, uncertainty, and the cost of your withdrawal. They come to miss what you once provided, and in that longing, your power grows. The lion steps away not because he is weak, but because he commands a domain so vast that even absence is a threat. This is the law of tactical balance. Power expressed sparingly is power preserved. Over-assertion leads to fatigue and resentment. Under-assertion invites disrespect. The master's role is to calibrate force, knowing when to hold the line and when to pull it back just enough to lure others forward into his trap. In life and leadership, this means mastering the dance of presence and absence. Speak less. Give less. Engage less. Let your scarcity create demand. Let silence become a warning. Power grows in the pauses, in the unsaid. The man who can disappear without notice is the man who forces others to wonder, and in wondering, obey. This is the edge that separates the king from the tyrant. The king knows when to hold, when to yield, and when to vanish. Remember, fear is not a constant state. It is a tool to be wielded with care. Use it too often, and it dulls. Use it too little, and it fades. Master the rhythm, and your power becomes a force of nature, unpredictable, inevitable, unstoppable. Power inevitably breeds resentment, and resentment breeds enemies. To hold dominion without collapse, you must not only wield strength but also guard against those who seek to undermine you from within. Sabotage does not come always with open weapons. It is born in whispers, in envy, in the slow corrosion of loyalty. The greatest threat to a ruler is often the traitor cloaked as ally. Recognize the signs early. Subtle shifts in tone, the glint of jealousy in eyes once loyal, the quiet distancing that precedes a strike. The man who ignores these signs invites disaster. You cannot afford blindness when those around you count the moments until your fall. The wise ruler keeps enemies divided, suspicion balanced, and alliances flexible. Rotate your confidants. Do not let any single person hold too much influence or grow too comfortable. Power is a constant negotiation. Trust is a scarce commodity. But beware paranoia. Fear that breeds isolation is the death of kings. The respected man is protected not because he controls everyone, but because he commands respect even in his absence. His silence shields him. His presence rallies loyalty. Use fear to prevent envy, but never let fear become your master. Let power be a shield, not a prison. In life, this means maintaining vigilance without losing clarity. Watch your circle. Reward loyalty quietly. Remove disrespect swiftly. Do not allow grudges to fester, but do not be blind to betrayal. Remember, the hated man is attacked when he looks away. The respected man commands loyalty even in silence. Your empire, your influence, your life, all depend on mastering this shadow war. Too many men mistake fear for identity. They believe that to be powerful, they must become the embodiment of fear itself, rigid, harsh, and unyielding. But this is a brittle throne. Fear, when wielded without wisdom, becomes a cage that traps the man himself. Fear is a tool, a means to an end, not the end itself. To cling to fear as your identity is to become inflexible, predictable, and ultimately weak. The lion who roars without purpose loses his teeth. The king who rules by terror alone invites revolt. Real power is fluid. It bends without breaking. It adapts to circumstance, audience, and moment. The wise ruler wears many masks, sometimes warmth, sometimes coldness, sometimes silence, sometimes thunder. This flexibility makes him unpredictable, and unpredictability commands respect. To be feared is to be seen as a force that cannot be easily contained, but to be feared always, without pause or change, is to invite resistance. The master of power knows when to be smoke and when to be flame. Masculinity grounded in fear alone is a prison. The new masculinity is strength with restraint, edge with elegance, presence with discretion. It is the man who can be both lion and king without becoming tyrant. You must learn to use fear strategically, to create boundaries, to command presence, to protect your domain, not to become defined by it. When fear is a tool, it serves your goals. When it is your identity, it becomes your weakness. Master this, and your power will endure. Fail, and you will be consumed by the very force you sought to wield. True power is not measured by fear alone, but by the loyalty it commands. A man who rules only through intimidation will be forgotten as soon as his shadow fades. The legacy of a king is built through presence that inspires, not terror that demands. To be feared like a lion and respected like a king is only the beginning. To build a legacy that commands loyalty requires a deeper mastery. Loyalty is not begged, it is drawn through gravity, the invisible force of consistent strength and fairness. The king who leads with clarity, who rewards silently and removes disrespect swiftly, crafts an empire of allegiance that outlives his reign. He knows when to show kindness and when to enforce boundaries, balancing power with purpose. Remember, the lion leads through fear, but the king rules through presence. Both are forgotten if they are hated. The man who cultivates hatred destroys his own foundation, while the man who balances fear with respect builds something enduring. This balance creates a force field around his influence, one that protects even in silence. In your life, this means investing not only in your image of strength, but also in the trust you inspire. Be just in your dealings, be measured in your rewards, be relentless in defending your standards. Let your actions speak louder than words, and let loyalty become the currency with which you buy your survival. Your legacy depends on this equilibrium. It is not enough to be feared today. You must be respected tomorrow. Only then will your power endure beyond your presence, and your name will be spoken with reverence rather than fear. You do not need to be loved. You must not be hated. You must always be respected. This is the law that governs survival, influence, and true masculine power. Roar like a lion when needed. Sit like a king when required. But never cross the line where fear turns to hate. Your strength lies not in aggression, but in control. Not in volume, but in silence. Not in seeking approval, but in commanding presence. The world respects the man who needs nothing, who offers kindness as a privilege, not a right. If you are ready to lead like a lion, rule like a king, and command without collapse, type silent power in the comments. Let this be your first decree, then disappear. Let your presence become the question they cannot answer. Remember, power is balance. Master it, and you will never fall.